media, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome from this first press conference of the European Union Election Observation Mission to Sri Lanka 2019. Before I hand over to our Deputy Chief Observer, I'd like just to make a couple of practical announcements. First of all, we will be live streaming this on Facebook, just so you're aware that it will be going live on our Facebook page. We also will have simultaneous translation in Sinhala and Tamil, and for those who need to use the handsets and headphones, Channel 3 and Channel 0 is the floor, which is English, Channel 1 is Tamil, and Channel 2 is Sinhala. We've also got, uniquely for an EU EOM press conference, a signer, and I'd be very grateful to the media if when you have your wide shots, if you could include the signer in that. We'd be most grateful for that. Thank you. We will have a statement from our Deputy Chief Observer, followed by a question and answer session, and that will mark the end of the press conference after that. But the Deputy Chief Observer will still be available for short interviews with the media if they'd like to do that, if they could approach me after the press conference. So I'll set that up in due course, and we'll be issuing or handing out a press statement and lots more information about the mission at the end of this press conference in the refreshment area. And I'll hand over to our Deputy Chief Observer, Dimitra Ioannou. Thanks.
Hello, thank you, Paul. Good morning, Your Excellencies, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. The European Union has deployed an election observation mission to observe the 16 November presidential election on the invitation of the Election Commission of Sri Lanka. This is the sixth election observation mission the European Union will have carried out in the country. We were here also in 2000, 2001, 2004, 2005 and 2015. Then, as now, we have come on the invitation of the Election Commission, and without such an invitation, we do not observe in countries holding elections. This track record demonstrates the European Union's long-term engagement in democratic support to partner countries and their implementation of commitments to holding elections within the context of international, regional and national undertakings and obligations. Since 2000, the European Union has deployed some 150 election observation missions around the world. The EU Election Observation Mission operates in accordance with the Declaration of Principles for International Election Observation adopted by the United Nations in 2005 by a number of international bodies involved in election observation. The declaration says that international election observation assesses election processes in accordance with international principles for genuine democratic elections and domestic law, while recognizing that it is the people of a country who ultimately determine the credibility and legitimacy of an election process. The first important thing to note is that European Union election observation missions are completely independent and impartial. All our observers abide by a code of conduct which stipulates we maintain strict neutrality in the course of our work and that we do not interfere in the electoral process. The EU EOM does not legitimize any part of the electoral process, nor does it validate the election result. Although operating under the European Union flag, in our assessment of the process, we are completely independent of the European Union delegation to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, EU member states, and all European Union institutions. The mission's mandate is to provide a comprehensive and long-term technical assessment on the electoral process. In doing so, the EU EOM measures Sri Lanka's compliance with the international commitments it has made through various human rights instruments. It also considers requirements in national legislation, as well as international good practices for elections. The mission will observe the following aspects of the election: the legal framework and its implementation, the work of the election administration, campaign activities of candidates and political parties, the role of state institutions and civil society, the conduct of the media, including social media, by monitoring key television and radio stations, as well as newspapers and online media, including social media. Overall environment of the elections, including respect for fundamental freedoms, civil and political rights, and of course, any election complaints and appeals that arise before, during, or after the elections. The 2019 European Union Election Observation Mission to Sri Lanka is led by Madame Marisa Matias, who is a member of the European Parliament from Portugal, first elected in 2009 and then re-elected in 2014 and again in 2019. She is supported by a core team of 9 election analysts who arrived in Colombo on October 11 and will stay until well beyond the declaration of the results. The core team was followed by 30 long-term observers who deployed this morning in terms of 2 to all 9 provinces of Sri Lanka. They will be covering the 25 administrative districts all over the country. This is a larger number of long-term observers than in 2015, and they will be deployed across a wider area than last time. Over the coming weeks, and on and after Election Day, they will be observing election and campaign-related events and meeting stakeholders across the board in their areas. This includes meetings with local election administration, governors, village councils, candidates and political parties, local branches of the judiciary, civil society organizations, and security agencies responsible for campaign and election day security. At regular intervals, they will report their findings back to the core team in Colombo, and these will contribute to the mission's informed and impartial assessment of the electoral process. The long-term observers are from 24 of the European Union's 28 member states, plus Norway and Switzerland. Towards Election Day, the long-term observers will be joined by 30 short-term observers and a delegation of up to 7 members of the European Parliament, bringing the total mission's strength to some 80 observers. On and after Election Day, they will be at polling stations and counting centers to observe voting, counting, and the tallying and transmission of results process. The chief observer, Madame Matias, will issue a preliminary statement at a press conference to be held in Colombo a few days after Election Day, assessing the electoral process up to that point and irrespective of whether the results has been announced. The chief observer will return to Sri Lanka to present the mission's final report with recommendations for future improvements to the electoral process only after the end of the electoral process, usually about 2 months later. At this point, I would like to thank you very much for your attention and for coming here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitra. At this point, we welcome any questions that there are from any journalists. If you could, if you have a question, if you could declare both your name and what media outlet you represent, we'd be grateful. And if there are many questions, perhaps we'll take 2 questions at a time. Thank you. No questions at all? Ah, yeah, 1 question, yeah. If you just wait for the microphone, will be given to you.
Amal Jaisinger from France Press. What has been your observations so far, the preliminary observations? Can you just walk us through the initial impressions?
One more question?
Hi, Eastern from the Sunday morning newspaper. You said that you've been here, we know that you've been here before this as well. Have your recommendations been taken or been implemented by the Commission or the Sri Lankan authorities looking at this election?
I will start with the first question. Thank you very much for this. Well, we've been here only for 10 days, and our long-term observers are now on the way to the provinces. So there are no assessments at this point, and there are no findings. I think we need some more time in order to collect information. And even more, as per our methodology, we are not coming in public with our assessments before election day. This will happen during the preliminary report press conference, where the chief observer will present to the public our initial findings and initial assessments. Regarding your second question, the last mission in 2015 parliamentary elections had produced 26 recommendations. Out of them, 3 recommendations, they were fully implemented, and that has to do with the establishment, the formation of the election commission as per the constitutional amendment. Also, recommendations that they were involving continuous voter education projects and trainings of election staff. And also, one of our recommendations about quotas for women. We've seen that at the local elections and at the local elections law, there is a 25% quota for women in the councils. There are also some other issues that in some of the recommendations they are partly reflected in the process, but we hope that this time we will manage to produce a number of comprehensive recommendations that the Election Commission, the Parliament, civil society, political parties will take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yeah?
I'm Shavindra Ferdinand from the Island newspaper. Both in 2010 and 2015, there were allegations of foreign interference in Sri Lankan elections. Both China and US were accused of funding political parties in Sri Lanka. Would you be taking any steps, tangible steps, to prevent foreign interference? Or do you have a setup, a mechanism to ensure there's no foreign interference in the Sri Lankan elections?
Well, in general, we observe according to our standard methodology, which we apply in every country that we are invited to observe. We follow all aspects of the electoral process. We are not focusing only on specific areas. So everything or any kind of information and findings that we will have at the end, we will analyze it and we will come to in public with that.
And I also I want to ask you, in 2004, the EU election team in Colombo alleged that the TNA received the support of the LTT to win the elections in the northern and eastern provinces. You made a report, you handed over the report to the Elections Commission and the government, but no action was taken.
Well, I cannot speak for that mission in 2004 because I really do not know what exactly happened at that time. But we're here now in 2019 and the team is ready to start the observation in the field, and from tomorrow our long-term observers will be operational, start meeting with all electoral and political interlocutors.
Can I speak without the mic? Now, can you just walk us through the exact methodology? Because you said you're not going to make any interim observations, but the whole idea of an election mission is that it would have a deterrent effect on anyone who's trying to rig the election or resort to some malpractice. So if you are going to remain silent in the run-up to the election, how do you think it's really going to have a direct impact on at least discouraging any kind of malpractice?
I The credibility of EU election observation missions is based exactly that we do not interfere in the process and we stay not neutral and impartial. During the next weeks, we will meet with different interlocutors at national level and at provincial and district level. All the information and findings that we will collect, we will assess and analyze them and assess them. And then we will come public with our first findings during a preliminary statement, with our preliminary statement in a press conference after election day. The idea is that we do not want to interfere when the process is evolving. And of course, if there are issues like we need to bring into the attention of the authorities, we will do so. But our role stops there.
But the point is, even from our point of view, after the election is over, there is very little interest in your report. It will be a very good academic exercise. But in terms of actually making a difference to the election, if you do not, during the campaign, if you see some very blatant violation and if you don't talk about it, how is it going to improve the credibility of the process?
At the end, as I said, we are not here to legitimize the process and we are not here to legitimize the outcome of the election. As an election observation mission, as the European Union election observation mission, we are not interested who is going to win or who is going to lose the elections, what is going to be the outcome of the elections. We are here to assess the process. And therefore, the recommendations that we will produce together with our final report at the end of the process will be at the disposal of the Election Commission and the authorities in order to take the necessary steps for the next electoral cycle.
Sulochana from Ceylon Today newspaper. You said that there were 26 recommendations you made during the 2015 parliamentary elections and only 3 have been implemented. Is that enough? And what else do you expect? If you make so many recommendations, are you at least following up of those recommendations? Because there were a lot of pressing issues mentioned in those recommendations. So are you ignoring it or are you just going to follow up on the rest of the mission because it impacts every elections?
Of course, we will following up those recommendations and we will going to assess if they are still valid for these elections, and probably there will be, some of them will be included in the next set of recommendations that we are going to produce. Those recommendations, we do not impose them to the authorities, the electoral authorities. We are proposing them.
Are there any other questions at all? If not, then we can declare this press conference over. Thank you all very much indeed for attending this launching of the EU EOM Sri Lanka 2019. We will be in touch regularly with the media over the coming weeks. If anybody has any particular requests for interviews, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. We'll be more than happy to try and accommodate that. And if anybody would like a short interview with Dimitra afterwards, then also if you could approach me and we'll make sure that happens as well. Otherwise, the press releases and a fact sheet about the mission and about the European Union election observation missions generally will be available at the same area where people registered as well. Thank you very much indeed.